Louis Roulet?
Yes.
Okay, according to the victim, she was at home alone when the suspect presented.
And that's when she clonked him.
That's her story.
The real killer. She lets him in, and when he's done, he stabs her over and over.
Mickey was the top dog when it came to lawyers in L.A. Sharp, quick on his feet, and always thinking 10 steps ahead. Just as he was about to step into court, his colleague Val hit him with some news. A rich kid named Louis was in jail for a molestation charge, and his dad was throwing serious cash at whoever could get him out. Mickey, never one to ignore a fat payday, took the case without hesitation. But first, he had another problem to handle, a biker gang leader who still hadn't paid him. Annoyed, Mickey confronted the guy, who swore the money was coming soon and begged for some patience. When the trial kicked off, Mickey asked the judge for a 1-month extension to gather evidence. The judge agreed, but his client wasn't thrilled. He wanted out immediately. Mickey just shrugged and told him straight. If he wanted freedom so bad, he should pay up. With no other option, the biker backed off. After wrapping that up, Mickey's driver took him to meet Louis at the station. On the way, he noticed some bikers tailing them. Staying cool, he had the driver pull over. One of the gang members walked up, looking pissed. They wanted Mickey to speed things up for their boss. They weren't happy that all he seemed to care about was money, even though they'd been hiring him for years. After some arguing, they finally coughed up $10,000. Business was business, after all. Mickey took the cash and promised to get their leader out next month. At the station, Louis looked like he'd just seen a ghost, but relaxed a bit when Mickey agreed to take his case. The guy was freaking out, swearing he'd been set up and had never touched any woman. Mickey told him to chill. No need to let his cellmates hear everything. Later that day, Mickey managed to get Louis transferred to city custody, meaning he was out of jail but had to wear an ankle monitor. The trial was scheduled for the next week. Outside the courthouse, Louis's mom's assistant approached him, asking if Mickey could guarantee Louis's freedom. If he could, there was a fat paycheck waiting. Mickey smirked. After all, he was the best lawyer in the game. The next morning, Mickey and his assistant, Frank, met with Louis and his mother. Before they got into it, Mickey made one thing clear. He worked for Louis, not his mom, so she had to step out. She wasn't happy, but she left, though her assistant stayed behind as Louis's new right-hand man. Louis finally told his side of the story. He'd been at a bar drinking when he noticed a woman, Regina, making out with some guy. Later, she slipped him a note with her address and a price. Curious, he decided to visit. When he got there, she was still with the same guy, so he waited in his car. Once the man left, Louis knocked on her door. She greeted him with a smile, but the second he stepped inside, someone knocked him out. When he came to, the place was crawling with cops, and Regina looked like she'd been beaten badly. Before he could say a word, he was arrested. Mickey had Frank compare Regina's statement with the crime scene photos. According to her, Louis had attacked her as soon as she opened the door, pulling a knife on her. She claimed she managed to fight back and hit him over the head with a bottle. But something wasn't clicking. Mickey grilled Louis, making sure he wasn't hiding anything. Louis swore he was innocent. Mickey studied him for a moment, then nodded. He believed him. That night, Mickey and Frank went over the details again. If Louis had been knocked out, then who beat up Regina? The guy she was with earlier seemed suspicious. Mickey sent Frank to dig into him. By morning, Frank showed up with security footage from the bar. They analyzed it and noticed something interesting. The guy was left-handed. Regina's injuries were mostly on the right side of her face, meaning she was probably hit by someone left-handed. Mickey felt like he had the real culprit. Confident, he took the footage to the prosecutor, expecting them to drop the charges. But things took a weird turn. Even after seeing the footage, the prosecutor refused to back down and pushed for a 7-year sentence. Something felt off. Later, while going through the case files, Mickey found out a knife had been found at the crime scene, with Louis's name engraved on it. Furious, he confronted Louis. Why hadn't he mentioned this? Louis admitted he always carried the knife, not to hurt Regina, but because his mom had been abused, and he wanted to protect himself. Mickey wasn't thrilled with the explanation, but left it at that. The next day, Mickey met an old friend, the police chief. Years ago, they had worked on a murder case involving a comfort woman. The supposed killer was already behind bars, but something about the case never felt right. Before they parted, Mickey reminded the chief of his promise to find the real killer. That night, at a bar, Mickey ran into his ex-wife, Maggie, who was also a lawyer. Over drinks, they talked about their daughter. Even though they were divorced, there was still some warmth between them, maybe even something more. The next morning, Mickey was reviewing Regina's autopsy photos when something clicked. Her injuries matched those from the Comfort Woman case. That meant one thing: the same person was responsible. 3 years ago, Mickey had defended a guy named Martinez, who was accused of killing that woman. Martinez had always said he was framed, but the evidence was stacked against him. Now, everything pointed to one person, Lewis. Determined to get to the truth, Mickey visited Martinez in prison. At first, the guy refused to talk, still scarred for what had happened. But after some pushing, he finally opened up. He described seeing the woman with another man before she was killed. Mickey pulled out a photo of Lewis and asked if that was the guy. Martinez's reaction said it all. He completely lost it. Mickey stormed out and told Frank everything. Drunk and angry, he ranted about how Lewis had played him. The guy wasn't some innocent rich kid. He was a cold-blooded killer. He had murdered that Comfort Woman, framed Martinez, and now he was trying to do the same thing with Regina. But as Lewis's lawyer, Mickey was trapped. He couldn't turn his own client in. Any evidence he had would be dismissed, and Lewis would walk free with even more legal protection next time. Mickey was furious. Lewis had chosen him on purpose, knowing the system would tie his hands. But Mickey wasn't about to let it slide. He swore he'd find a way to bring him down. Late that night, he got home and called Maggie to check on their daughter. But as he reached for his door, something fell off. The lock was already turned. Lewis was already inside Mickey's house, straight up admitting that he knew about Mickey's visit to Martinez in prison earlier. No games, no pretending. Lewis came clean about everything. 3 years ago, he was the one who killed the Comfort Woman and pinned it on Martinez. The whole Regina story? Completely fake. But Mickey was stuck. Lawyer-client privilege meant he couldn't do a thing. Before leaving, Lewis casually asked about Mickey's daughter, her age, her school, just enough to make a point. Mickey, the best lawyer in the game, was now representing a full-blown psychopath. The next morning, Lewis's trial kicked off. It was just jury selection, but the prosecution wasted no time throwing their weight around, setting things up to make Lewis look guilty. When it was Mickey's turn, he played it cool, like he wasn't defending a man who had practically threatened his family. His job was to win cases, and that's what he intended to do. Later that day, Mickey went to his daughter's soccer game, trying to get a breather, but then Maggie showed up. Teary-eyed, she broke the news. Frank had been shot dead. No suspects, no leads. Mickey didn't react, but deep down, he knew Lewis was behind it. Angry and drunk, he lashed out at Val for ever bringing Lewis to him. Seeing he was falling apart, Maggie took him home. That night, guilt kept him up. Frank was gone, and he felt responsible. The next morning, Mickey got a call from a detective. The autopsy was done. The bullet that killed Frank came from an old, rare pistol. And just like that, Mickey knew Lewis had stolen his gun and was setting him up. That afternoon, the trial continued with a witness from the bar. The guy swore he only spoke to Regina briefly and had no clue what happened afterward. Mickey questioned him, asking a simple but critical detail. Was he left-handed? The man said yes. Mickey then pointed to Regina's injuries, bruises on the right side of her face. That meant she had been hit by someone left-handed. The witness started sweating as Mickey completely tore apart his credibility. After court, detectives were waiting for Mickey with a search warrant. They suspected him in Frank's murder. They found a box of guns identical to the one used in the crime. But Mickey played it cool, claiming his gun had been stolen. Luckily, the detective knew him well enough to believe him. Later, Mickey's assistant handed him a list of the prosecution's witnesses. One name stood out, Chorus, a prison snitch who testified for cash. Conveniently, he had been locked up with Lewis. Mickey saw his chance. He told his assistant to pay Chorus off. If the prosecution called him, Chorus would spill all of Lewis's dirty secrets. And Mickey made sure the police chief was there to hear it all. The next day, Regina testified. The prosecution led her through her story, and then Mickey stepped in. With carefully chosen words, he twisted the situation, making it seem like she had been trying to blackmail Lewis. The jury started to doubt her. Tears welled up in her eyes, but Mickey had done his job. Lewis looked like the victim now. Then, Lewis's mother testified. She claimed she had told Lewis to carry a knife for protection. With teary eyes, she painted her son as an innocent young man caught in a nightmare. As the trial neared its end, Mickey warned Lewis to stay sharp on the stand. Lewis nodded, confident they had the jury on their side. But just as the case was about to wrap up, the prosecution requested extra time to call one last witness. The judge allowed it. The next morning, Mickey entered the courtroom and noticed the police chief, detectives, and Maggie in the audience. Then, Corus was called to the stand. Mickey objected, but the judge overruled him. Corus spilled everything. Lewis had confessed in prison about killing the comfort woman, setting up Martinez, and attacking Regina. The police chief left in a hurry, visibly shaken. Lewis panicked, denying everything, but the damage was done. Mickey, playing the role of a confused lawyer, acted surprised, though this had been his plan all along. During recess, Lewis cornered Mickey, furious. Mickey just smirked and walked away. When court resumed, the judge declared Lewis not guilty. Mickey had won the case. Lewis's mother was ecstatic. But before they could even celebrate, the police chief stormed in and arrested Lewis for the 3-year-old murder. Shocked, Lewis turned to Mickey, who leaned in and whispered, "Never underestimate the best." As Lewis was hauled away, a detective approached Mickey, impressed. Mickey had played Lewis, pretending to defend him only to set him up for something worse. He had pulled it off perfectly. That night, Mickey's driver handed him a gun for protection. Mickey smirked, another case closed. But then his phone rang. It was Maggie. Lewis had been released. Not enough evidence to keep him locked up. Mickey instantly told her to grab their daughter and hide. He knew Lewis was coming for them. Then he remembered. Lewis had an ankle monitor. Mickey called Val and tracked him. Sure enough, Lewis was heading straight for Maggie's house. Mickey got there first, gun in hand, warning Lewis to back off. But Lewis just grinned. If Mickey shot him, he'd ruin his own career. If he let him go, Lewis would keep coming back, making their lives hell. Mickey stayed calm. "I don't need to lift a finger," he said. That night, when Mickey got home, he found a surprise visitor, Lewis's mother. Turns out, she was just as twisted as her son, but she wouldn't be a problem anymore. A few days later, Mickey was discharged from the hospital. On the way home, his driver updated him. Martinez was free, and Lewis had been arrested again. This time, the cops had the proof they needed. As they drove, a motorcycle gang rolled up. But instead of trouble, one of them approached Mickey with a request. One of their guys had been arrested, caught up in a mess with a cop's wife. They wanted Mickey to handle it. Mickey grinned. "This one's on the house."